All right, sorry about that. Welcome and thank you everyone for joining the Internet of Value Foundation New York, episode 104. And for all of those who listen to this information in the future, I hope you find it as valuable as I know I do every single day. And just want to say thank you, Shellfish and OC and Alex and everyone joining so quickly. Long John. Took me a few moments to set the PC up there for recording for a moment, but hope everyone is having a very enjoyable start to the new year. And I really don't have any specific topics. If anybody wants to talk about anything, Alex, Long John, OC, if you guys want, you'd be more than welcome to come up and start the chat, and I'll change the title above. But I kind of just went with the flow of what I was feeling like, and I'll grab some content to put above in relation to at least the things I put there. But welcome up, Shellfish.
Happy Thursday, I guess it is already. Happy Thursday, hey everybody.
Happy Thursday. Welcome to the space, Emmy. We're just starting off, and might be quiet for a moment. I'm gonna grab some content in relation to some of the stuff I put up top. I don't have anything specifically really planned for today. I'm starting off slow for the new year. Last space on Monday, we talked game theory a bit and mindset, manifestations, frequencies, getting into the thought of the um, span of greater longevity of time, but also shorter periods of time. The right mindset. And this Thursday, I was thinking maybe I'll keep that going, but um, I don't know. I thought more talking about, if anything, quantum properties and light and space. But welcome up, Emmy.
Hey, how are you guys?
I'm well today. I'm well. And
Uh,
other than it's not too cold, but East Coast is expecting some snow this weekend, unfortunately.
we are getting some in the Mid-South also.
Getting snow in the South, is that common?
I mean, we're like in the middle, so yeah, it's pretty common.
I think you're rugging Shellfish.
Sorry, OC. Go ahead, man. Please go ahead. I accidentally kicked Sasha, and he was trying to come up, hit the wrong button.
No, I just posted up something on the Jumbotron. I really think you guys it'd be a good listen for you guys if you guys haven't listened to it already. It's a conversation between, I can't say his name, but Lex Freeman. He had him on his podcast, and I listened to it on Spotify. And I know he posts his conversations now on Twitter here, so you don't necessarily have to have Spotify to listen to those conversations. But it's a definitely great listen. Very interesting. Very interesting dude. Highly recommend you guys take a listen if you haven't already.
So, not to ask for any spoilers, but do you want to give I mean, I've watched a decent amount of Lex Friedman's
So
interviews.
it
So I'm not personally the largest fan, but he is an interesting individual, at least, and he's intelligent.
it's one of those things where he's trying to do something with in sort of combine quantum computing with like physics laws. He goes into pretty in depth into what he's trying to do, and it's sort of hard to remember everything that he spoke about. It's just more of the bigger topics. Um, but it's more on how that can be improved with the integration of laws, and it's, yeah, it's sort of there's some things obviously I didn't understand, so I sort of had to look up. But yeah, I mean, I really can't give a quick summary, to be honest. Besides
Well,
that, it's a really great conversation, and it's
that's
mostly and it's pretty much the Gil Verde account being anonymous via the based Beth Jessel's account. And it was really for him. It was a way for him to sort of express his thoughts without being confined, and sort of his logic was that, well, if you're sort of confining your thoughts and you're sort of limiting your thinking, because you're sort of withholding yourself from being able to talk, and from being withholding yourself from talking, you withheld new potential ideas that can potentially come out. So that was his reasoning behind creating that anonymous account. And yeah, very interesting to.
well, great quote from Einstein. Imagination is more important than knowledge, right? And that's kind of all the only what you said was a directional pathway. I can totally talk about that if you'd like to break down that aspect of quantum processing. But Sasha, welcome to the space, man. You got your hand up. Please feel free to jump in.
Yeah, thanks, Deb. So it was interesting to hop in and hear your discussion about or brief interlude of time perception, because just last night I was reading, and I know they've been in the news recently for a lot of negative stuff, and people's attention is on that. But I was reading some research that came out of Harvard this past week about wound healing, and how there was some fascinating experiments being done on the perception of time having a direct effect on how quickly people's wounds would heal. So Harvard essentially took some participants, and long story short, they all experienced a time interval that was set. It was 28 minutes, I think, was the interval. And the wound healing that took place within the intervals fluctuated based on the participants' perception of the time elapsed. So I haven't gotten into the real nitty gritty of how they controlled the time perception, and how different people perceived longer periods than 28 minutes, which was the case. Like, some people reported 50 plus minutes of time passing when it was really just 28 minutes. But the wounds seemed to have cellular recovery that was expedited during that period of time. So yeah, and tie that into the attoseconds talk and all the other conversations we've had, and it's super fascinating stuff.
That's super interesting, right? How they're saying, right, the mind sort of controls the body. Do you know what the wound was, by any chance?
No, I don't. This is a thorough paper, and I've just gotten past the introduction and the conclusion, which is kind of the way I tackle these things, and then I get into the meat and potatoes of the experiments. So I'm doing it as we speak. I just couldn't help but to include the mention of this because Death Ranger sort of prompted it out of me with his mention of time perception and all that in the introductory phase of this space. So he knows how much I like congruences and coherence.
And that's an interesting topic, an interesting study, right? Because that study itself is 28 minutes, but let's say we were talking about a more severe um, uh, injury, where maybe it's bone healing or skin regeneration, XYZ. I really wonder how that would affect those type of injuries. Very interesting.
Well, and, let's take it one step even deeper. The cells in your left arm are roughly the exact synchronized age of the cells in your right arm, right? Why is that? How did the cells in your left arm know to be the same age of the cells in your right arm? There's this interesting synchronization that seems to be occurring. And you start talking about things like life extension and aging in itself, right? Who knows anyone who's 60 years old but has a 20-year-old arm, right? No, nobody has a at least I've never seen this, and right, we probably wouldn't unless there was some sort of technological tool that was used to do so. But this very interesting notion of this synchronization of of cellular phenomenon that's occurring inside of our bodies for some sort of interesting reason, right? And so going to this time dilation, or the thought of time, how we perceive time to be, and of existence, of this measure of difference between spaces, and going to, OC, how you had mentioned, right, quantum processing and biology, which, when you talk about quantum computers and quantum processing, one of the biggest questions, or hurdles, I really should say, that quantum processing has had as an industry for the last 20 years is, what are we going to do with it? Okay, so we have this super powerful ability to create mathematical algorithms that can create a very definitive, right, numerical expression in the form of a conclusion, right, to this algorithm, right? We have our theorem and a proof, and with this, right, we're able to break it down in graphs, right, and so um, very powerful when you think of material studies or biology, right, medicine, how we mix molecules together to create specific medicines that have specific use cases, and so for really for the quantum world and for quantum processing, the medical field is by far been the biggest industry that's taken it upon themselves to research and develop into the quantum processors, and so, you know, both of these realities that you had mentioned, Sasha and OC, very close to being something that can be computationally expressed in a form that humans will understand the possible reasoning, and then past reasoning of why the occurrence is occurring, right? And then we can say, well, if this is why it is occurring, then how do we interact with it to make this the perceived occurrence that we want to, and start talking about life extension. It's funny. Shellfish posted. Um, it was a space with Elon Musk yesterday, and he was speaking about, one of the things was life extension, and in quote, he said, "I don't think it would be very difficult to solve life extension. However, do we want to?" And I think that's really powerful to think about the times that we're living in, and all of us as a collective, right? Um, each of us as individuals may be very powerful and be able to create great change, but is it the particular individuals that we want to see the great change in the image that we maybe want, and as ourselves, right? And so there's this larger picture of this synchronization that I find really interesting, when you talk about industry, or right, technology tool sets in general, that we're still hurdled by our own inability to want to truly just work together to provide services for all rather than individual and profit. So I think it's an interesting thing, and that's going to occur in the next 5 to 15 years, and really be because of artificial intelligence is the term we use, right? But the robotics and tool sets that are gonna change the dynamic of society in the way that we incentivize the structure of interacting with each other, and therefore, forcing, I don't want to say force, right, but right, leading us down this pathway of this ability to live in this world of harmonious synchronization where we're all on the same pathway. And that was a lot. I'm sorry. If anybody wants to come up, though, please feel free to hit the request and come up and speak. 808, Kryptonic, glad you guys are here. Songbird, uh, Shellfish, I don't know. I guess you're having some technical difficulties today. Sasha, though, please feel free, man. Jump in.
Yeah, and so I just, for the sake of clarity, I want to correct myself, because now I've digested the PDF into my AI and created the sort of Q&A back and forth. So it was, the study found that when participants perceive time as moving faster, their wounds healed more compared to when time was perceived as moving at a normal rate or slower. So everybody experienced the 28 minutes, but it was the accelerated time that healed the wound. the wounds faster, and that makes sense with the mind-body connection. But now that I've got access to this like Q&A template, what was that question? Was it you, RC, that asked the question? I didn't have a direct answer to. I'd like to see what the AI says in response.
Yeah, it is. If what was the wound that was being controlled within the study?
The wounds in the study were created using a standardized cupping treatment. Cupping is a technique often used in traditional medicine where heated cups are placed on the skin to create suction. This suction causes small circular bruises or marks on the skin. In the study, the method was chosen to ensure uniform wounds across all participants, allowing for a consistent and controlled way to measure the healing process under different perceived time conditions.
So would you guys say if it's affecting the speed of healing, do you guys think it's affecting age on a cellular level?
That's fascinating, bro, because this is what intrigued me to this story. My mom, and this is a close to the heart story, and I jumped right into this further exploration last night. She works in the microbiology department that's developing and working advanced studies on something called clotho which is an activator. I'm paraphrasing all the conversations she's had with me on this, and I hope I'm doing her justice. But the clothoprotein is actually an activator for the aging process, and they're looking at all the stresses that can impact clotho production and reduce the amount of clotho that the body has available to it, similar to like the glucose, I guess, function and interplay between tapping into the body's reserves for glucose when you like go on a diet. Apparently, clotho is directly related to aging, and we abuse a lot of its production for stress and just mental healing that it could otherwise be reserved for insulating our age and maybe helping us experience a fuller life. So yeah, I know she would be like, "You missed all these points" if she heard that. But yeah, sorry, Mom. I'm getting better.
And interestingly enough, it says increase in the only study that I saw that was increase in clotho was by working out. Right? They saw that. They said they saw a increase in the protein by 3 months. Google Fu Man, welcome to the space. I'm so happy to have you here. I think this is the first time. So, if you would like to jump in on anything that was spoken about so far, or have your thoughts on anything, please feel free.
I haven't really heard anything yet, and I don't want to speak about something that without knowing what the subject matters are.
Uh, yeah. The role of time in the healing process is kind of uh, a launching pad for some of the discussion we've had, but I don't want to. I don't want that to be the driver for conversation unless we're all on board for exploring it.
It's super interesting, and I you know it almost begs the question in the sense of like, is time somewhat of an illusion? And my own personal opinion is I do think so. It's the illusion of this reality that we exist in, this particular entropy state of dimensional reality that has allows us to perceive this existence in its fullity. I should say entirety. Um, However, at the same notion, right, it doesn't change that how I perceive things to be at this moment is how I perceive things to be. And so the question is can we relatively, and if we relatively, say us as a species were to synchronize and to change the factor of even belief in time itself, in this same kind of thought, Sasha, as this much larger group study of the synchronization possibility, um, would aging itself cease to be? It's right. It's very philosophical, and it's almost so highly theoretical that it would be improbable to be able to make an outcome, because obviously you're not going to get everyone in the world to believe that and to work on that and see if it's a possibility. At least I don't believe that would be a possibility to happen. Um,
Right.
that would be really cool.
Well, it would be, and gosh, this is so interesting because I know a little bit thanks to Google Fu's disclosure on his personal his field and his expertise. I know a little bit about his background in acupuncture, and now that I contemplate like how that interplays into this discussion, acupuncture on a surface level, no pun intended, is the piercing of skin in a uniform manner to where some healing process might be coaxed out of that needle, inserting into the skin all over the body, and then all of a sudden the mind body connection kicks into healing mode, and a lot of people might resort to that traditional view of acupuncture as some sort of therapy and therapeutic process, which they report as such. But how much of that is a result of the initiation of the wounds on the skin and the needles? Now that I know about the cupping method that was used in this time trial.
Wow, that's why you're making the legal AI and I'm making the acupuncture AI. That's for sure.
Yeah,
um,
I used Legal Eye to get me to this point of the conversation with the cupping method and stuff didn't know anything about, and now it's sort of it's
well,
filling in the holes
your
in my
legal
brain.
eye is like hallucinating about acupuncture. I can tell you that.
I didn't have it I didn't have it render anything on acupuncture. I am hallucinating on acupuncture based on my understanding of like just the surface level of what it constitutes, which is needles in the skin.
Cool. I'm happy to step up for this. And I can speak about it because my thesis was on acupuncture points. And that was, I did that when I was getting my license, well, the academic phase of my license. And so in doing that, what the project actually was, it wasn't an explanation about what acupuncture is. It was the collection of all information available in English at that time in a database that was organized according to the points on meridians. And when I did that, I discovered or uncovered several things that were not being discussed or were incorrect in the way I was taught. And I was taught by people who were straight from China. So they were like multi generational lineage holders. Um, but I'll come back to that in a minute. However, this is what I would tell a person about acupuncture is that your human experience is a combination of physical and non-physical and their interdigitation, their correspondence and reciprocation. And acupuncture gives us a map and some teaching, and that teaching is also in latent in your body about how that interface of the physical and the spiritual is actually happening. And so it doesn't have to be a mental thing for it to work. However, when I went to school, I learned a whole systemized representation, very scientifically organized with technical language and filters and lots of other stuff. And so my project was putting acupuncture points in a database. Now, acupuncture points meaning they're not the arbitrary points. I mean, you can stick a person with an acupuncture needle anywhere, and we even have names for doing that stuff. But when you learn acupuncture, you learn the teaching, and there are branches, but I got it from China. And the Chinese system has 361 points on meridians. No other points, which are there are thousands, are on meridians. And you can't add or subtract points from the meridians. And you learn in China, you learn about these points by learning a mnemonic song that starts with the first point, which is the first point on the first meridian. So it's the first meridian's first point is the first in the sequence. And so it has an algorithm then, which would be 111. Now, the second point then with the algorithm would be the first meridian, second point in the sequence. And when you get to the second meridian, that would be 2 for the meridian, 1 for its first point, and 12 because there were 11 points before then, with a total of 361 points, which relates it to geometry, as in sacred geometry. And we're living in the plane of manifestation and demonstration in a reciprocal relation between the physical and the not physical, which is the source of life itself. And that is represented as the center in the circle, and all of the angles in the arc, and specifically the 360, that represents 360 different perspectives or points of correlation in which we can have a effect on the interdigitation of your vehicle, your physical body, with your destiny as a manifestation. So that's acupuncture.
Wow.
Very cool. Uh, just real quick, my presumption was somewhat accurate because as I'm listening to you disclose the acupuncture ins and outs, as far as you can educate us on it on an entry level, I was researching the cupping method, and it is directly correlated to Chinese qi flow, I think is how it's pronounced, QI, qi flow of the body. And cupping is a method similar to acupuncture that activates the circulatory motion and flow of blood within the body in a very strategic aligned way. And that was the method that was used in this Harvard experiment to study the perception of time. So maybe my AI is all wrong on that base. Maybe I can have you cross-reference the suggestion that the cupping method is a Chinese influenced chi
No,
flow
no,
correlator.
cupping's totally legit, and
Cool.
it has specific purposes. It's basically a mechanical methodology relative to acupuncture, and they can be done together. And you can also heat points up, and you can do different kinds of manipulation, lots of them. But the subject that I'm stepping into is about the relationship between light and manifestation and time, right? Is that correct? So now, from the point of view of Chinese medicine, going to this word qi, all right, you have to appreciate the cosmological construct to be able to even entertain an understanding of the science, all right? So everything is one thing. And in Western mind, we have like the Platonic or Neoplatonic ideal of a perfect cosmic, and then its imperfect representation as a reflection. That doesn't exist in the Chinese. They don't need that. They are acknowledging that when you wake up to being alive, you are alive and you are in life and you are a part of life, but you're not all of life, and life itself includes you. Therefore, you don't have to figure out what the perfect thing is because you got to deal with the thing that you're doing in order to survive, right? So this is a more logical, reasonable, and common sense starting point, not philosophical there. And so then, if you were to accurately describe, for the purpose of diagnosis or success in your mission here, what the situation is and therefore where you are and where you're going, then you would have to take into that the picture of the reality, because it's only in relationship to reality that you can actually go and get somewhere, because otherwise you're wandering around, obviously, right? So therefore you have to name reality even if you don't understand it, because you are in it, and your goal is to have a right relationship with that so as to not make stupid mistakes, because they are punished by suffering and death. So therefore everything is Tao, and so you can point at it and use that as a word which represents everything with nothing left out. And then you, as an experience, are part of that. And there's a relationship between everything and you, and that's Tao Te Ching. All right, so Tao Te Ching in Taoism, that's the Tao part, that's the Du part, and Ching is like the sacred work or text or representation. And you could be a representation, and as such, life would be your sacred work. But about Lao Tzu, we could talk a later thing. I did a space on Lao Tzu. But anyway, so where I'm going with this is the relationship between 1 and 2 becomes 3, because 3 is neither the everything or the part of the thing. It's the interactive process of the 1 with this part of it, which is 2. And that's 3, and that's chi. Okay. So therefore, now that you understand chi, you can understand what's important to see about Chinese medicine, to understand what it's actually saying, is that all the relationships between the polars, all the various polarities and their interactions, and if you have like a cyclic manifestation, like a frequency, which is a cycle which moves across from cause to effect and has its high limits and low limits, those are yin and yang. All right. And as such, it becomes a frequency. Now, if you have multiple frequencies, like the entire quantum field, then those frequencies will have, as they say in quantum mechanics, there will be these probability waves, which are waves, right? So therefore, they're frequencies in a certain way, and they're having their interactive, if they coincide in location and time, so to speak, although that wouldn't be accurate words, then they have mutual amplification, mutual destruction, and everything in between, which is chi. So all of that is chi, but you experience chi. For me to talk to you, I need certain kinds of chi, and our metabolism is the metabolism of chi. And everything about the medicine is the diagnosis of the pattern, the dynamic, the causation, the reciprocation, and the restoration of the normal relationship between you and reality. That's what all the techniques are to do.
Guys, don't you guys just love when Google Foods talks? I'm honored to have your presence here, man. But Sasha, you got your hand up, man. Please feel free to just jump in. You guys are having fun.
Question, yeah, question to Google Fu and anyone in the room, since we're getting there with this particular focus, and I'd like to the idea of circadian rhythms playing a role in this, and the natural flow of time versus what is introduced to us. And I'll keep it isolated to like a Western paradigm, because I think it's something that we can at least all tap into as a semblance of compartmentalization of time, and controlling of time outside of our natural waking state, that is heavily influenced by light and day cycles. But now, you have people who have made lives of working overnight shifts and staying working overtime. That phraseology has always fascinated me. So, how much of this Google food, and the breakdown and the manipulation of perception of time, that at one point was the individuals to explore naturally and establish a natural sense of rhythm, not only for the individual but for the group, as far as I can tell. In historical context, civilization always had a different perception of how time moved, and different regions and cultures exemplify that. And now the culture from the West seems to be like almost a cubicle like rendition of what you do for hours 1 through 2, 2 through 4, 4 through 6, so on and so forth, to where a convenient routine of supply and demand is produced for a larger whole. How much of that can interfere in the healing process of mind and body and spirit in the context of this larger discussion we're having?
That's a great question, and I would want to bracket it. I'd say it can have very significant and very disharmonic effects. But in order to actually have a discussion about that part of it, we would have to have a clinical discussion. There'd have to be an examination. You'd have to determine whether it was a behavior or the light, or, the relationship that you didn't want to be in bed with your partner, whatever's right. So I wouldn't just go after it and put a whole bunch of stuff on that. Time dependent symptomology is a feature in Chinese medicine, but with the relationship to time being the question, right? So how does your relationship to time change your relationship to health? That basically was your question, right? Yes?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that's
Okay,
accurate.
so
Yes.
I'm gonna go all the way to the other end, and I'm gonna say you are alive living in a certain kind of time, a certain duration of time bordered by when you arrived and when you're going to end in this form, right? In the physical. Now, I see that life did not begin when I was born, doesn't end when I die. I came from my parents and my father's dead and I'm still alive, right? So, anyway, the point to see is that um, life was here before I got here. Life is here when I am gone, and now I'm alive in life. And depending on how I appreciate the significance of time, like how do I orient myself in time, then I will have a different experience. So, to make that obvious, some people think that life ends when they die. That was my dad. He had no spiritual teaching. He refused to have any, and he disputed that any was worth looking into. He thought it was a weakness. And so he had none. So when he got to the end of his life, he started to well, first I should say he succeeded enough so that he had all of the success that he could point to. He had money. He set himself up in a gated community where he could have a slope down to the medical wing and die, and he had it all paid off, right? So therefore, he was right about everything, but he nobody wanted to hang out with him. He didn't have meaningful relationships at the end of his life, and approaching the end of his life, it was a black hole, and he just couldn't think of it, right? Now, that's very different from me. And I had a conversation with my parents because they're my parents and I'm in health, as a profession. And I needed to understand whether they needed help from me or I should stay away. And I had already gotten the sign I should stay away. But anyway, so we have this conversation in which they established that the end of their physical existing is the end of everything, and that therefore was the end of our conversation. But for me, that's not what's going on. For me, this is one of the experiences that life is having, and I call it this person myself. And I have a clear understanding of what I'm doing here, and I am clear about the fact that this is not the only time or the only lifetime in which this process has been my mission. So, in that regard, my experience is like the fingerprint of a hand touching a table, and I know that that hand is part of a body. Now, I can't understand the body because I can't understand Tao as a totality of reality. However, I can recognize that, and I live differently because of that. So, my benchmark or my scale, my measuring is different because I literally decided, because there was a movement from believing what I was told in my family and what I saw in the world to understanding reality in a different way, in a different domain. Now understanding reality in that domain, which is much more satisfying, I don't live my life like other people do. But I'm not constantly plagued with this consideration of whether I'm neurotic anymore because I've already gone through the process of verifying that my scientific assumptions about meaningful life and what it makes as a difference for me are true. So that's where I sit on time. I don't sit in one lifetime.
That was super interesting. And want to be fair to the hands and newcomers who've come up. 808, please feel free to jump in, man. And then Saturn and Wiz, welcome up. If either of you guys would like to speak after 808, just please feel free to put the hand up, and I'll go right to you.
Hello, everybody. I always love this space because a lot of these subjects is really close to me, especially with what Google Fu was talking about, chi, how the interconnectedness of our inner being affects everything else around us and how everything else around us affects our own being as well. Just in like the form of medicine and taking care of ourselves. How the time affect us in a way to where we're at today as human beings. You know, if we go back through history, through time, to the indigenous people's minds and their studies and their knowledge, such as with the Chinese medicine and the different meridian points that they use to counter the flow of the bad energy within yourself, and kind of, you know, form. There's like acupuncture, like how he was talking about, and different non-invasive ways like massage therapy and stuff like that. Within my own culture, it's called lomi lomi, but it also coincides with what we intake and what we eat, to how we are spiritually connected through the actions of that person giving us that lomi, or that person giving us that acupuncture. It's also that person that's also giving it, also studying us, how we do our things. And like how Google Fu was saying, you know, it's not just done just any old kind of way. The person and the one receiving such actions gets the experience from that person giving it, but also the experience that you're going through yourself, you're giving it to them. What's crazy about that, if when you get taught through generational teachings, that teachings you get, you will never find in like a school or anything, because that's through their family lineage, through thousands of years of just formulating and going through all of these different things. That's what's wild about a lot of these different teachings, is that it goes back into not just doing the thing. It also is a lifestyle of what you need to do as a person yourself, and how you interpret the things and perceive things as you go through your daily lives. And how time affected us as people, you know, is the time through how we teach our kids on a lot of these things our ancestors used to teach their kids back in the days. Like for in my culture, our healing process is what we call la'au lapa'au, which is could do with a lot of things within yourself. It's not just the way what medicines you intake, it's also what you do and how you do it spiritually, mentally, and physically. And it's not just doing it, it's also learning about the different plants and substances you do to make in all these different mixtures you take in order to prepare your body to receive either, whether it's acupuncture, lomi, or you know, and stuff like that. So the knowledge of all that is not well known of how it used to be well known back in the days. Like my ancestors would look at me and still look at me as an adolescent because I can't even read the stars like how they used to be able to navigate. Like that's what good thing someone also mentioned, is how we look at time, day, sunrise, sunset. You know, a lot of the indigenous people didn't really use the sunrise as a start of a day. They really used the stars and the moon rises, moon sets, what constellations was in the sky at the time of where you're at during the day, night, or whatever. It's wild to see how the shift of knowledge and education changed throughout time, which led us to where we're at today. You know, with all of these different sicknesses and trying to heal ourselves. You know, it's kind of crazy because to me, I always was said that stress also is a factor when you're healing yourself, because if you're very stressful, your body is not at its optimal prime state to be able to heal yourself, because it's so focused on releasing that chemical within your body that gives you that feeling. And then when you get to that feeling, you know, you're like within acupuncture, you're that's what's crazy about acupuncture too, because you're when you're pressing those meridian points, your body is releasing this chemical reaction within you to help you wherever that point was. Is Yeah, it's mental, but it's wild. I love it. Thank you for sharing, Google Fu.
Oh, sorry about that. Sasha, man, please feel free to jump in.
So this is just this discussion alone is providing, at the very least, a very respectful entry point for further scientific exploration that I'll conduct independently. I'm sure we all will in our own facets, but at the same time, we have the opportunity to do it in a collaborative effort here, which is very intriguing to me because based on the commentary that was just provided by I'm not sure who was speaking, but based on that gentleman's commentary, we can use historical evidence of wound care and how a generation has healed as far as mind and body based on mental the mental decomposition or the illnesses or the events that have proven to be repeatable within a window of time. We can also discern what may have been interfering with that healing process in a natural flow state, not as individuals, but as people who are sharing like a shared view of reality in the specific perception of how time operates. And what I mean by that is like some of the issues that society tries to tackle in different sectors of the world that keep persisting. The root cause of why some societies may not be able to confront those in very like resonant and resolve driven manner might be because of the impediments of their understanding of time as a shared community that just may require some unclogging of sorts or acupuncture in a metaphorical sense. Or maybe even a direct sense, who knows? But yeah, I say all these things because I always recall the first conversation that Death Ranger and I had, and that's been another lane of interest of mine is retrocausal relationships between effects and their causes themselves, and I think it's embodied in this discussion. I don't want to group too much into it, but time series analysis with machine learning is another field of which I've been paying a lot of attention to, and AI seems to be very good at being able to time lock instances of learning and expedient learning curves and hone in on how it got there and what the dynamic was in a certain window of time for it to learn as much as it did and go from like one stable point and stable state to a very accelerated state of understanding a particular notion. And that seems very tied into the healing process that we're discussing on a biological level that humans encounter. It just might be that AI is able to teach us a lot about how it heals, and its version of healing might be error correction, and that might be accessible through time series analysis. I'm saying some of these key phrases very directly so that the algorithms themselves pick up on them and that I can back propagate it into my own research. Thank you for allowing me to share.
Yeah, that was very interesting, Sasha. I enjoyed that. And Wiz, man, welcome up, and you got your hand up. Please feel free to jump in.
I suppose I'll begin by saying thanks for the space. I'm sort of jumping around, seeing like what's going on early in the day because it's earlier for me right now. I know that's for some of y'all. It's like technically either afternoon or evening. But as far as this topic is concerned, though, the one of the things I keep hearing a lot, especially in the midst of people who are AI adjacent, is this idea of the great replacement, and I'm not so sure like we're really headed that way. To be frank, I think a bunch of people are just scared and intimidated, and to put it bluntly, uncomfortable with the fact that up to that point they've been living life on default mode. And what I mean by that, for those that are more on the computer side of things, um, that was a cat, by the way. Don't mind it. Yeah, like for those of you that are more on the computer side of things, there's this mode called kernel mode, and essentially, yeah, this cat is like Loki trying to get my attention, so I'm trying to focus here. Um, there we go. So, in the computer context, like the idea of a kernel mode is when you essentially remove all the guardrails and allow the computer to function to its absolute max potential. Another concept that sort of ties into that, it's overclocking. And yeah, man, most people currently are very uncomfortable with overclocking themselves. And who can really blame them? Because most everybody that I'm aware of, especially if you've been to the traditional educational system like I have, you're conditioned to be a regurgitator, nothing more, nothing less, right? You just know just enough to do your job, but not so well that you can question why you do it. I think it's like a pretty classic thing that I'm sure some of you at some time, shape, in some way, shape, or form have said before. So with that in mind, I'd like to share a quote actually from a article I've written last year, actually, technically a few days ago, but you get the point, for the sake of comedy. The premise of this whole thing was me doing a reminiscence of over the course of what has happened for the year 2022/2023. From my vantage point, it definitely feels like those years is like the year 2008 in terms of the rise of the iPhone and all that stuff. I think we definitely have that same moment on our hands, except it's large language models, right? So the idea here was that I would experiment with ChatGPT specifically, and I would ask it to conversate with me as a way to assess how much it's a progress since its launch, which at that time of me publishing it was about a year, more or less. And the prompt was pretty simple. I asked it, and I told it actually, you're an expert in literacy, psychology, linguistics, and cognitive research, and your goal is to assess me, the user, and provide a rating from 0 to 100. And I kind of gone on to state that just ask me a bunch of questions, keep them succinct. And we've gone down a little bit of a thread in terms of my interest, which I mentioned happens to be languages. I'm a polyglot. I speak 5 languages. 3 of them I speak fluently. Um, and to that, it responded, considering your multilingual proficiency, have you noticed any differences in your thought processes or cultural perspective when switching between languages? So I'll stop there. I want you to ponder on that question real quick and really ask yourself, can you think of any context, and whether it's your day-to-day life or, you know, amongst friends, amongst peers, would you consider that question, how likely would you consider that question to come up in conversation? I'd say close to zero, to be honest. Obviously, I'm not gonna say impossible because it's all probability, but the fact of the matter is, here comes this AI tool, which, by the way, I didn't tell it to ask me that specific question. The simple premise was that you're the expert, like, talk as if I'm the student, and either teach me things or try and pull some threads out of my head. And it did that. Another quote that stood out to me in that experiment too was when I mentioned suicide. Immediately it turned into, like, babysitter mode, and was like, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. Here's the resources to check out, if you feel unsafe. But I immediately put it back on track to say, oh, I'm just making a statement. I'm not saying I'm in distress right now. And he went right back to the topic at hand, and it asked me, considering your proficiency in multiple languages, have you ever engaged in creative writing and storytelling? And any of them, if so, what themes or genre would you find most compelling? And then I responded, cyberpunk for the most part, simply because I think it's a pretty elegant mirror of what we're currently living in right now. This idea that, a big thing is taking over while the general rest of society is dealing with poverty and basically collapse. And it has gone on to say, given what you've said about this particular topic, um, how would you express your worldview in terms of personal philosophy? And I responded, it's pretty simple. I'm just radical. And it responded, given the term radical, how do you define it in the context of your personal philosophy? And then I've gone on to say that radical, at least from my perspective, it's more of a matter of the etymology, and that when I'm speaking of being a radical, I'm literally speaking in terms of what it means at the root, right? Which, oddly enough, radical, for those that don't know, comes from Latin radix, which means root. So the idea here is that I'm a very much a first principle thinking kind of person. I don't engage with ideas or concepts unless I'm familiar with, what they are at the base level. Think of it as like, playing with Legos, but except swap out Legos for ideas. And then it has gone on to ask me about um, exploring, my concepts of how I think of ideas versus Legos, which I wrapped up this whole conversation with it by saying that for me, at the end of the day, it's not about playing with the Legos per se. It's about mixing and matching things so that I come to a certain conclusion that I'm happy with. So that's pretty much it as far as that experiment is concerned. So I'm hoping that that gave you some insights in terms of like the wild future we're headed into. Personally, I'm still feeling ambivalent about it. I think on one hand it's pretty exciting, but on the other hand, there's a lot of room for this stuff to be misused, and there's a lot of ways that people can fall into the same traps that the introduction of the iPhone first brought about into the world, you know, as in referring to social media, referring to doom scrolling, basically bad habits that overall would make people a lesser version of themselves. Thanks for the time, and yeah, looking forward to read some comments, thoughts.
Thank you very much, Wiz, for coming up, and it was a lot of information. So I'm gonna try and because there was a couple things you said that I definitely thought about, and one of the things about the languages, actually, the context of the way that we interpret different languages in our brain has been something that we've talked about in the space a few times, actually, and it's something I've thought about myself concurrently many of times, and the reason for that, right? Because I try to study outside of the realms of just English, and so I see and I understand that there is a contextual difference behind the way that languages help us interpret feelings in itself, and this is really interesting conversation I've had with a friend of mine, Ziz, about a month or so ago now, 2 months ago, where we were talking about sound in itself, and maybe this makes a little sense to what you were speaking about, also Google Fu earlier about all of the different resonances of energy that come together to create this interpretation of reality and sound in itself, right? Which language obviously being a feature of sound, right? An interpretation of sound, um, the it being alive and it being some part of this substantial factuality of which what creates the reality in itself. And so it's actually really cool when you think of like the power of actual just language or spellcraft, right, breaking it all the way down. So it's yeah, I think it's fascinating, and I agree with your first part. The first thing that you said was, which is the thing that struck out the most to me, going back to the 1600s, say 1700s, before electricity was introduced, right? And the first street in France had lit up in, I think it was 1776. The largest industry was candle makers. And when light bulbs came out, all the candle makers, right, got in their pitchforks and got ready and got very upset because they thought they were going to be displaced. And in reality, what just opened up was way more opportunities because electricity in itself opened up way more opportunities from industry perspective and business and interactions that we have with each other. And I think, just like you said, this is that next step. And I think what it brings is an accelerated thrust to the tool sets that we also create and use. And Google Fu, please feel free to jump in, man.
So when I'm thinking about time, um, I try to be grounded in common sense. And when I talk about what I mean, I'm talking about when I build something, like let's say I'm going to build a piece of furniture. I have an idea of that piece of furniture. I visualize that piece of furniture. I buy the pieces of wood to make that furniture. I cut those pieces of furniture according to this picture that I already have. It's already made, right? So the thing that I have in my quote mind, and I've drawn out, and then the ability to make it. Well, I have to cut the parts according to the drawing that I did based upon what it'll be when it's finished. So there's two processes, there's two movements in time. One is going backwards from the point of view of cause to effect, and the other is going forwards from causes to effects. And causes and effects will reflect, and that's always going on. Now, a more accurate understanding of time would be an awareness of both those movements. And if you're going to truly be creative and not just reactive, then you have to prioritize the counter time movement, right? The counterclockwise movement, as it were, right? Now, when you look at the Enneagram, which you could roughly say is a diagram of pi, and I put a diagram down there about where it fits into the acupuncture algorithm. 22 divided by 7 is pi 3.142857, which is to say that the 227th point in the sequence, starting from the first point, is this point, which is the stigmata point in your hand. And that's the fire point on the pericardium channel, which is a fire channel. So that confirms the identity of the pericardium, which is the minister of the heart, which allows you to represent God as a person. And for people who wish to access God through you as a person, that regulates that point, right? So now the Enneagram as a diagram is about the relationship across the membrane between your inner world and the outer world, and who you let in and how you express out. And then if you look at the Enneagram, you can see there's a triangle that's wholly within the creation as it exists, so to speak. That's the Trinity. It's always omnipresent eternally. That's its time frame. And then you can see that there you could make two triangles that meet outside meaning outside of the world that already is existing. And those are the counter rotational forces of yin and yang. Now, when you think about back propagation in that context, it's not that hard to see what back propagation could be. But it gets more interesting to me when I think about how these sociopathic megalomaniac gene corruptors have tried to back propagate a version of reality through their institutions and with their money and their censorship of the internet as it was accumulated, which they knew they would be using to run machine language learning and these kinds of machine learning things. But what they did was to create an already corrupted, because of censored, database. And so all along the way, starting with like Douglas Engelbart and his dynamic knowledge repository, they broke that up and all the good that the internet and all of this could be, because they've been weaponizing it since most people here were born. They weren't even born when this strategy was already envisioned. They built a house in which you would have a device and you would ask it for reality, and God would respond. That's the reason why they changed Google to Alphabet and the search engine to G. And the G is in the center of that sign for the Masonic Lodge in town, which corresponds with the geometric symbols which are necessary for you to appreciate the meaning of the language which the Masonic tradition has as part of what it is, although it's been corrupted and abused. And we could talk about that, but I'm not. But anyway, so now, this was clearly articulated yesterday, and I clipped it out of Mike Adams' Health Ranger long conversation with Zach Voorhees, the Google whistleblower, about their censoring of the data feed. And they were remarking that the fact that people were censored off Twitter and Facebook and out of the results in Google and all these places, and you knew that if you said certain things in certain places, then you would, not be appreciated, or you would be disappeared off the interface of like LinkedIn or whatever, right? So, but during that time was the time that they were reaching the climax of building these large language models. So I submit that the reverse back propagation was inherent in the situation when the technocrats were designing the information which they would build the machine language robots on. And then additionally, what they put in there is what they call guardrails, were ways to be able to manually go in there and basically torture the system so that it would maintain their narrative, which they back propagated into the situation. There are various manifestations of this, like flat Earth and crap like that. But it's going to go wild now because everything could just be, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't check. It was a hallucination. It wasn't supposed to say the thing that wasn't true. So people need to get their decentralized information, because if you don't have a touchstone, you're going to be, you know, the parasite's going to eat you and your descendants.
If I
Well,
may say something in response to that, real quick. So, for me, to be honest, I think the difference, or rather, what it really.
Did he rug?
Oh, I thought it
Rug,
was
I
me
got hit
that
rug
with
for
rugged.
me.
Sounds like it. Yeah, same here.
I got hit with a rug.
Wizzy,
Yeah,
you still
I
there?
got hit with a rug. You know how it is, man. Classic Twitter being Twitter. Why? Wait, this feature has been out for like how, 3 years now. Why is it still not fixed? Jesus Christ, man. Um, but yeah, I was talking about the whole decentralized versus centralized thing. To be honest, I think it's sort of missing the point a little bit. Simply because if you look at the common user behavior right now across the internet, it's pretty clear what it's indicating. Centralized services is king, and I think it's specifically in virtue of the fact that um, it's interconnected and easy to talk to from device to device. I'm actually very pro decentralized. Don't get me wrong. I really see the value in it. I see how effective it is in terms of protecting the viability of a system on the long term. But I think realistically, though, we can't really just pick and choose what we want in terms of how the things are being done moving forward, especially in the age of machine learning. Because like try and picture this, right? Would you rather have a main system where millions, if not billions, of people talk to on a regular basis that can organically learn from, or would you rather have a cluster of hundreds of systems here and there that are in the hundreds of thousands that you have zero clue what they're doing, what they are, or what they're for? um, I think in the long term, it doesn't really help in terms of propagation of information. For me, I think low friction for information is something that probably will be best. I kind of have a more of a, a reserved stance when it comes to that. The more free flowing information is, the better. And right now, like it or not, centralized services have enabled it.
Yeah, and I would say, because I don't think that the centralization behind applications, right, like your devices, your Apples and things, I don't know if that necessarily ever dissipates. I mean, I would love to see a different incentivization structure in society. I don't really know how that looks to a company-based market structure which produces goods, but decentralized distributed information sources, that's something, and I completely agree with Google Fu, is very important. The moment we're at right now is kind of like a lot of people don't really understand. They look at large language models as an omnipotent source of information, could be highly dangerous. I completely agree with that. And so, yeah, and this even goes historical backs. I mean, even 200 years ago, the only people who had information were the ones who could afford books, right? People didn't even know how to speak unless they were, right, given the gift in doing so. And so we're definitely on the right pathway, I think, and the trajectory that I like to see. But Sasha, 808, you both felt very strong about it. I saw the hands pop up right away. I think it was Sasha that was first, but I may be mistaken.
Uh, yeah, I just wanted to chime in on what Google said. Very strong words and a very momentum-driven commentary that I think we can pull a lot from. And and I want to introduce the idea of a metaphor. Well, I mean, it is a metaphor in itself. The grandfather paradox when it comes to back propagating that sort of logic that was suggested would be in like a continual form or linear sequencing that would almost be safeguarded and built into some core logic that would extend itself into oblivion. Um, I think there are a lot of fail points in that approach that are somewhat time sensitive. And the cool thing here, Google, and this is up your alley as well, is that some of those unlocks, some of those capabilities of understanding the scope of the situation are time, not only time sensitive, but they're enlightenment sensitive. So it may actually be directly proportioned to one's understanding of the entire scope, how much back propagating one can do, and insert mechanisms of multi adaptable systems to where the linear function of the suggested like keeping things as they are, status quo approach that indoctrination thrives on, as far as control is concerned, and centralization can be thwarted based on the forecastable predictive analysis of that inevitable shift that isn't on the minds of the people who would be interested in ensuring that their institutional narratives and their main blob narratives of control are kept and preserved. They don't have the motivation to be enlightened to the shift that has already occurred. So their idea and their understanding of back propagating this sort of logic fails, and it's sort of dead on arrival, and we get to witness it in real time. Sorry for all the allusions to time and talking about it there, but I mean, I guess that ties back into the conversation as a whole.
No, I tracked all of what you said, and that's one of the reasons why I went through what might have been somewhat painful for some people and digressive about the situation. But it's the higher that establishes the order in the lower, and the process of that is entropic, and metabolism is the restoration of that which was spent in the organization and the movement through time from cause to effect as a physical frictional event, right? So the universe as the totality is balanced, but the local anomalies permit the aggregation and dissipation. And so aggregation and dissipation are metabolism, and metabolism is multi-system dependent. So that means that as you know, if you go back to the thing that was my premise, it's an axiomatic assumption that the higher or the potential um, achieves something and loses its potential as it does something. All right, and that's physics, right? And that's the Newtonian death of heat death of the universe. But there's a problem about that. But the problem is solved by metabolism. However, if your understanding of metabolism is limited to what we call biology, and you don't include larger things like humans are part of a biome, which is part of a planet, which has an atmosphere that interdigitates it as a membrane with its inside and its outside to a solar system, which has different parts of which they all together operate as a whole. Jupiter catches comets, the sun shines on us all, and the solar system has a membrane, the Oort cloud or whatever we call it, and it's moving in the galaxy. And all of those things are organismic, and they're all centrally sourced. If we agree that they're all part of the one, then the one is the source of them all. And that as a whole is always the destination, but it's also the source. So now we're at a very minor fraction of that, and we call it me and my life. And we're trying to appreciate the action of the whole. Now, with regard to that, it could get very philosophical, but that's why with my people in the clinic, I force them to do things that are methodical and to use what I call objective science, right? So it's scientific. There's a thought experiment. Are you a co-creator? What part of you is co-creating, and can you see it? So this is the exercise. Every single day, you get out a piece of paper. I've posted this before. It says a goal is a dream with a goal is a dream with a deadline and a clear plan for action. And there's lines for different periods of time, like 3 months and I don't remember, 6 months, a year, and 3 years. And so you have these goals, and every day you write them down. And then at the end of the day, you give a score. And as a result of that, you now are charting your actions through time and whether or not you're able to do the things you've written down as your plan with goals. And why is that important? Because when you understand your relationship to time as a function, not just as a philosophy or an excuse, then you understand how to produce the correct orientation and back propagate your destiny now that you're here and you can produce it.
It was really well said. And, I guess the way I say it, and I simplify it, right? To me, time is an illusion, but it's exactly how you describe it, right? It's this state of if you are um, in this moment, right? To you, time is this moment. And so what are you going to do with this moment? And, I love that you look at it from, those specific time frames. I'm the same way. I'm kind of more macro. I like to look at it from like long span time frames, decades of my
My
life, right?
my uh, my current favorite word is parallax. All right. So individually and collectively, we're creating what's happening, parallax. Um, Personally and environmentally, I'm having an answer to what I think is true. um, Centralized and decentralized are both necessary, just like individually and collectively. But if we allow one side to be the one that dominates, then the other will start to disappear. We've arrived at a point of extreme centralization. And if we're going to survive, it's going to have to flow out like a tide that was high goes out. Otherwise, we're going to be basically washed over. But I'm not personally feeling anxious. I'm feeling excited. The fact of the matter is the cosmic environment is changed, and what's going on is not because we've done things and built up this thing, like the theory of Western civilization evolving. It's actually, we've been in the dark ages, and there remains some glimmers of light which could turn into fires. They could be bonfires, bone fires of these misrepresentations of reality. And just like in the spring, right now it's winter where I am, but in the spring, everything's going to start growing. We're already growing because human consciousness is entering a period of spring. And the prior power possessors, who really don't deserve their positions at this point by their evidential actions, poison dropped from their tree. They will be replaced. They cannot win because they are anti life. That's why they're doing what they're doing, and what they're doing is evidence that they're anti-life. It's not about coordination. It's not about reciprocation. It's not about respecting the goddess. It's not about manifesting the destiny of life. It's about their own personal sociopathic megalomaniac idea of modifying the galactic code, which is what DNA is part of. And what they call DNA is simply the physical mirror of what is the most valuable thing in the universe. And we are, in that regard, one of the most valuable things in the universe. So if there are aliens involved, they don't give a shit about us as individuals, even if they eat us. They want our DNA because that's cosmic galactic technology.
I love that. And with that, I think I'll end off. Unless Sasha or 808, if you guys had any thoughts that you'd like to share before I close, any last statements. But this has been an awesome space.
No, I just thanks to all the speakers. The momentum in this conversation is the proof in the pudding of pretty much all of our sentiments, whether we can acknowledge that in the present moment or not. You would have to reflect upon your own individual contribution to the greater conversation, as well as the organic federated approach that we all took here in creating a streamline of data that will carry us into a natural reflective state, as Google was suggesting, because we have the awareness of being able to do that on this particular level of reflectiveness that we just experienced. And that is an initiation process that is part of a larger organic evolution that I feel cannot be thwarted and cannot be diverted at all, despite the constant attempts for us to interfere as a species with that natural process. Or the circadian rhythm of the universe is another way of looking at it. And this is just a matter of us aligning with it and realizing that there is a more fruitful and bountiful approach to spending our time on this planet, and it is rooted in a knowledge of coherent functionality. And what that means is actually dedicating the time and effort to understanding what that means, putting it into application, and realizing that it provides results, so that the cause and effect and cause relationship can be substantiated and proven, with, of course, awareness and reflection being key components. Whether people are interested in doing that or not, it takes place.
And always remember, no friction, no orgasms.
I love you guys. It was a great space tonight. I hope everybody has a great rest of the week. We will be back Monday, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and look forward to having everybody in the space. Hopefully, Google Fu, we have you in more spaces as well, because you bring a lot of not only knowledge but wisdom with that knowledge, which is very important.
And jokes. You got to know how to tell jokes, or they're gonna stop listening.
And jokes, yeah. But thank you again for coming, and good night, everyone.